Dallas as, first slide please. We like to think of Dallas as a vertical crystalline structure rising out of the landscape, something like a castle surrounded by a moat. But is that really the way we experience space in this horizontal city? I'd like to rethink, that we think of Dallas as a landscape. Like a landscape, it's not dense, it's wide, horizontal, bright. Its system of organization is something like a pattern, a repetition. The infrastructure that moves through it, like the rivers, are like folds in the fabric of that pattern. The infrastructure, like in a landscape, is what gives our city its order, be it water, be it transport. Calatrava gave us infrastructure. Even Kessler gave us infrastructure. These are the beautiful elements of our city. But how does it help? If we think of our city as a landscape, how do we find places for people in this horizon? So I went to Chile to find out. This is the Ciudad Abierta, just north of Valparaiso. It's an experimental city made by a group of poets and artists and architects. And as you can see, the organization of the city isn't very clear. There's no geometry. There's a sort of scattering of elements in the landscape. But as I lived there and stayed and worked there, I began to understand that things like topography and the way that the elements of the buildings were seen against the landscape gave it an order you could begin to understand. The repetition of elements as you move past them. The motion of the person through the landscape becomes an important part of how you understand its order, so that there are markers in the ground or markers against the horizon of the sky that help you understand where you are within that open space. The idea that things can be temporary is an important element in a landscape, and they brought it to a city. Buildings were allowed to disappear in time, and then the bones of the buildings remained there in the territory, still giving us a kind of a structure in order to understand how we were in that territory. Now, this is the water tower. The water tower is a really important iconic element in the Ciudad Abierta. It's the first thing you see when you come from the other cities and approach. And it's an important element, of course, because of the water it used to carry. But I discovered that it's also really important for the people who lived there because of the memory of the poetic acts, the actos, the events that took place in front of it. Now, this is the chapel. From the chapel, you move down through a grove of trees, following the path of the dry riverbed to the amphitheater. The amphitheater clearly is a place of community gathering. It's a place which is cut through by the slice of the dry riverbed. It's connected to the topography, it's connected to the idea of movement, of river flow, of infrastructure, but in fact it gets its real kind of density of meaning from the memory of all the events that took place there. It's not until you've been to Mass in the chapel and have attended a wedding there in the amphitheater that you begin to understand the real intensity of meaning that these places have for the people who live in that landscape. The poetry of the group, there's a poem called Aperturas, which was the founding of the Ciudad. And the Aperturas is connected with this space, the Agora. And from the Agora, you look back up to the inland sea, and then you turn around and you look back out to the openness. But you only look out to the sea after reading the poem inside. So we're going to try this. We're going to do an experiment. Everybody stand up. I want to read a poem and see if we can make a collective space in this environment. Turn this hall into a landscape that we can share. Close your eyes. In discovering the territories, and through this stumbling, looking for its limits, el camino se intentó por la parte alta de los cerros. Se llegó ahí. We came to a stop. The blind lined up. A silence allowed sound to expand. We were suspended on the very rim of the gorge, without eyes, absolute openness, disorientation, an inscrutable vigilance. Our space was squeezed, and we played, and the play revealed, although so close, none knew how to be united. Then we realized we could rediscover the limits through the medium of disorientation. cerca los unos de los otros, que no dependía de la voluntad el estar juntos. Dispersion is contained in closeness. Thank you, sit down. Okay, we've done that. We've done an experiment here, but how do we take this experiment out of the hall into the city? How can we create this community feeling in the city of Dallas? Let's imagine we go to a neighborhood, a barrio across the river, and let's imagine we ask the youth and the older people to draw their roots, to draw how they understand the city, and to write their memories. And they write their memories on 100 flags. And let's imagine we plant these flags throughout the neighborhood. And then we go through the neighborhood in a grand paseo, a procession, and we collect 100 flags. And as we collect them together, we read them, and we learn each other's memories and each other's ways of understanding this barrio. And then we find out that in the 50s, there used to be a neighborhood store here. And in fact, there was a jukebox where the kids from the 50s used to learn to jive. And we go and we roller skate in the place that there used to be a roller rink in the 50s. And as we go through, we mark physically in chalk the places that we're standing on, making public places again in this neighborhood. And together we take our flags and we walk through the whole neighborhood, and we end up at the very edge of the neighborhood where the neighborhood meets the levee of the river. And we climb up to the levee and we have a ceremony. And in that ceremony, we replant the 100 flags, all in a long, long row, making a rhythm out of those memories. We mark a new orientation for our neighborhood out here on the edge of the city, and we have a celebration of the shared landscape, which is Dallas. Thank you.